Ashley's voice sliced through the grand Christmas party like a shard of ice. She stood beneath the chandelier, her designer gown glittering like frost, her lips curled in a smile meant only for show. Her words weren't loud, but they were sharp enough to echo across the marble floor, sharp enough to freeze every conversation in the room. And there I was, standing in the doorway of the Whitman mansion, my simple burgundy dress wrinkled from the storm outside. The hem was spotted with dirty slush, and my hands still carried faint streaks of grease from a roadside car battery I'd tried to coax back to life. My hair hours of careful styling now clung in damp strands to my cheeks. I didn't look like a guest at the most elegant Christmas gathering in Greenwich. I looked like someone who'd lost her way to the servants' entrance. For a moment, the silence hurt worse than Ashley's words. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, scanning, measuring, dismissing. A woman at the piano stopped playing mid-note. The soft jingle of glassware ceased. Even the fireplace seemed to quiet, as if the flames themselves had been shamed into stillness. I had arrived 30 minutes late, not because I didn't care, not because I hadn't prepared. I had planned every detail of this day down to the earrings I borrowed from a neighbor. But life, unpredictable, messy life, had other ideas. On the slick road to the estate, I'd found an elderly woman stranded beside her luxury sedan, hood up, engine dead ice pelting her silver hair. I could have driven on. I could have saved myself the humiliation I was now living. But I didn't. I stopped. I knelt in the slush. I poured Coca-Cola on the corroded battery terminals, just as my late husband Tom once taught me. The car started. The woman smiled. And my dress, my hands, my careful image, they were ruined. So I walked into this mansion not as the polished mother-in-law Ashley wanted to display, but as myself, Mary Sullivan, 64, widow retired nurse woman who still believed helping someone in need mattered more than looking perfect under a chandelier. But in this world, Ashley's world, that wasn't the right answer. My son Dan rushed to my side, his brow furrowed with worry. "Mom, are you okay? You look like you've been in an accident." His hand gripped my arm steady but uncertain, as though he couldn't decide whether to defend me or apologize for me. "I'm fine, honey," I whispered. My voice carried more steadiness than I felt. I just stopped to help someone on the road. Ashley's eyes flicked over me from my stained hem to my wind-burned cheeks. Her whisper was loud enough for half the room to hear, "This is embarrassing. Everyone's staring. Maybe she should go home, change, and come back later." The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. For 3 years, I had been the outsider at every Whitman gathering. At the wedding, I was seated at the far end of the table. At family dinners, I was introduced not as Mary, but as Dan's mother from New Haven. Ashley's family valued appearances. Old money, old rules, old walls that women like me were never meant to climb. Still, part of me had hoped tonight would be different. Dan had said they wanted me there, that his grandmother Evelyn especially thought it was time. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that if I wore the right dress and said the right things, maybe, just maybe, I could belong. Before we dive into family betrayal stories, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. Thay tu kwadi cho tu kwakumin vau tu kwa ode la her story. But now, standing under that chandelier with every eye fixed on me, I realized appearances didn't matter. Not really. The same people who judged the wrinkles in my dress would never see the years I spent holding double shifts as a nurse, or the months Tom and I went without heat so we could pay for Dan's textbooks. They would never see the way kindness cost you something but gave you everything worth keeping. I wanted to shrink, to disappear into the polished floorboards. My cheeks burned and my fingers itched to smooth the ruined fabric at my sides. I thought of leaving, of turning around, slipping back into the cold, and pretending I'd never tried. But then, in the silence that followed Ashley's dismissal, I heard my own voice rise steadier than I expected. If I had to choose again between a clean dress and helping a woman stranded in an ice storm, I said my words carrying farther than I meant them to, I'd still choose the woman. A ripple passed through the crowd. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others looked down at their champagne flutes. One man near the fireplace raised his brows as if surprised I had spoken at all. I don't know what I expected: applause, laughter, more ridicule. But what I felt in that moment wasn't shame. It was something closer to defiance. Because deep down, I knew the truth. Appearances fade, fortunes crumble, parties end. but character, the kind that kneels in the snow to help a stranger indoors. And though I didn't know it yet, though, Ashley's smirk still hovered in the air and Dan's grip still trembled on my arm, someone else had heard me. Someone who mattered more than all the polished guests in that glittering room. Her name was Evelyn Whitman, and before the night was over, she would change everything. If you're still with me, let me rewind a little, because you're probably wondering, how did I end up at that party in the first place? It started 3 weeks earlier with a phone call from my son. Mom, Dan said, his voice careful, as if he were stepping across thin ice. Ashley's family is having their annual Christmas party. They want you to come this year. I nearly dropped the mug of tea in my hand. For 3 years, I had been on the outside looking in. Christmas dinners, summer picnics, 4th of July fireworks, all celebrated in the Whitman mansion without me. My invitations were always lost in the mail. And now suddenly I was wanted. That's wonderful, I managed. What changed their minds? There was a pause on the line. I could hear Ashley talking in the background, her voice quick and clipped. Then Dan answered. Grandmother Evelyn's been saying more about family, about how everyone should be included. She asked about you, Evelyn, the matriarch. The one woman in that family I'd always found hard to read. She had sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. At the wedding, she'd studied me across the reception hall, and I couldn't tell if she was evaluating me or protecting me. Well, I said slowly, that's very kind of her. Dan hesitated again. Mom, just make sure you dress nicely. You know how they are about appearances. Appearances, always appearances. I hung up and sat for a long time in my quiet kitchen, staring at the old linoleum floor Tom had patched himself years ago. I wanted to believe this was my chance, that if I looked the part, if I proved I could belong, they might finally see me as more than just Dan's poor mother from New Haven. So I threw myself into preparation like a soldier heading to war. I took 2 buses to the outlet mall and walked through racks of dresses, my fingers lingering on fabrics I couldn't afford. A young saleswoman asked what I was shopping for. When I told her, she smiled kindly, as if she understood. Let's find you something elegant, she said. We landed on a burgundy dress with subtle beading along the neckline, originally $200 marked down to $65. It wasn't designer, but when I stood in front of the mirror, I almost didn't recognize myself. For a moment, I looked like someone who might belong at the Whitman mansion. I bought shoes that pinched a tiny clutch bag and clip-on earrings that sparkled under the store lights. When I got home, I practiced in front of the mirror, how to smile without looking nervous, how to shake hands without trembling, how to answer when people asked about my life. What do you do these days? I rehearsed. I'm retired now, but I was a nurse for 30 years. Oh, where do you live? In a cozy little apartment in New Haven. Cozy. That word again. I hated it, but it was the best I had. The night before the party, I called my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, to ask if she could feed my cat. She listened patiently as I explained about the invitation, the dress, the importance of it all. Then she took my hand and said, Mary, just be yourself. If they don't see your worth, that's their loss. I smiled, but inside I thought being myself hasn't worked so far. The morning of the party, I woke to the sound of ice striking the window pane. A storm warning flashed across my phone, hazardous driving conditions. My hair appointment was canceled when the salon lost power. The seamstress couldn't finish the hem on time because her street was flooded. By noon, I sat in my robe staring at the storm outside, wondering if fate itself was telling me not to go. Then my phone rang. Mom, are you still coming? Dan asked. His voice was tight. Behind him, I heard Ashley's sharp tone. Tell her everyone's already here. Everyone except me. I closed my eyes. I'll be there, I said. I did my own hair and makeup, though the lipstick trembled in my hand. I slid into the burgundy dress, pulled on my winter coat, the only one I owned, and stepped out into the freezing rain. The drive was slow, every mile a test of nerves. Cars crawled along tires hissing over black ice. My hands gripped the wheels so tightly they ached. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. And then just as the stone gates of the Whitman estate came into view, I saw her. An older woman standing beside a luxury sedan with its hood up. The storm had plastered her scarf to her face, and her gloved hands shook against the cold. I should have kept going. I was already late. My heart pounded with the weight of the invitation, the dress, the chance to finally belong. But another voice inside me, Tom's voice, reminded me of who I really was. You don't leave people stranded, Mary, he used to say. So I pulled over. I rolled down the window. And with those few words, do you need help? I set in motion the very moment that would bring me humiliation under a chandelier. and something far greater than I ever expected. The wipers squeaked across my windshield, fighting to keep up with the freezing rain. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel as the Whitman estate gates finally came into view. Relief fluttered through me. If I hurried, maybe I'd still slip into the party before dinner was served. That's when I saw her. A luxury sedan sat crooked on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking weakly through the storm. Beside it stood an older woman, coat dusted with ice scarf whipping around her face. She lifted one hand, not waving, just steadying herself against the hood. For a moment, I thought about driving past. My chest tightened with the thought, "You're late already. They're waiting. This is your chance." Then another voice rose inside me. My husband Tom's voice, warm and steady from years ago. "Mary, you don't leave people stranded, not in weather like this." Before I realized it, I'd pulled onto the shoulder, my little sedan shuddering in protest. I rolled down the window, icy wind rushing in. "Do you need help?" I called out. The woman turned. Even through the storm, I caught a glimpse of sharp blue eyes behind oversized sunglasses, her silver hair plastered to her forehead. She looked dignified, composed, more annoyed than frightened. "My car won't start," she said calmly. "Battery, I think." I hesitated. I wasn't a mechanic, but I knew enough. Tom had taught me the basics back when we couldn't afford roadside assistance. I glanced at the Whitman gates just up the hill, then back at her. My dress, my hair, my one chance at acceptance, it was all at risk. "I can take a look," I heard myself say. The cold slapped me the second I stepped out. My coat did little against the freezing rain, and my heels sank into the slush. I popped the hood and peered inside, heart hammering. Sure enough, the battery terminals were covered in white corrosion. "You've got buildup here," I said, raising my voice over the wind. "Do you happen to have any cola in the car?" Her brows lifted skeptical. "Cola? Coca-Cola? Cleans corrosion in a pinch. Trick my late husband taught me." To my surprise, she opened her elegant handbag and pulled out a small glass bottle of Coke. I laughed under my breath. "Of course you do." Carefully, I poured the soda over the terminals, watching it fizz and eat away the residue. My fingers slipped, brushing against the dirty metal. Brown liquid splashed across my skirt, soaking into the burgundy fabric I'd chosen so carefully. I grimaced. So much for arriving pristine. "You're going to ruin your dress," the woman observed, her voice steady, almost clinical. "Already am," I said, scraping away the last of the buildup with my car key. "Sometimes you've just got to prioritize people over clothes." She studied me in silence, as if weighing more than just my words. Finally, she nodded. "Try it now," I asked, stepping back. She slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. Relief swept through me, warming me more than the coat ever could. She stepped out again, this time with a faint smile softening her elegant features. "Not many would have stopped," she said, "especially dressed for a formal party." I shrugged, wiping my greasy hands against the inside hem of my coat. "Family parties come every year, leaving someone in danger that would sit with me forever." Her expression shifted, something like approval sparking in her eyes. She reached into her bag once more, this time pulling out a cream-colored card embossed with gold letters. She handed it to me with gloved fingers. I read the name and felt my breath catch. Evelyn Whitman. My mind spun. Ashley's grandmother, the woman everyone spoke of in half-truths and careful tones, the matriarch I'd been told rarely involved herself in family matters. "You're Dan's grandmother-in-law," I stammered. "And you must be Mary Sullivan," she said evenly. "I've been very curious to meet the woman who raised him." The storm howled around us, but I barely felt it. My stomach dropped as realization hit the very person I'd been trying to impress for 3 years had just seen me on my knees in the slush grease on my hands, cola stains across my dress. "Shall we head to the party together?" she asked, slipping off her sunglasses at last. Her eyes sharp as the cold now glimmered with something else, something almost like satisfaction. "I think it will be more interesting than you expect." As I followed her car up the winding drive, my reflection in the rearview mirror made me wince. My hair was plastered, my makeup gone, my dress ruined. Yet strangely, I felt lighter, because for the first time that day, I had chosen character over appearances. And Evelyn Whitman had noticed. The Whitman estate rose before us like something from a movie set, every window framed in white lights, wreaths hung with velvet ribbons, the kind of grandeur I'd only ever seen in magazines. As I followed Evelyn's sedan beneath the covered portico valet, attendants hurried forward, their polished shoes slipping slightly on the wet stone. One young man opened Evelyn's door with a respectful bow. "Mrs. Whitman, We weren't expecting you so soon. Your driver called to say the roads were too dangerous. I decided to drive myself, she said, simply stepping out as though she hadn't just been stranded on an icy road. Her poise was effortless, as if the storm bowed to her authority. Then the second valet reached for my car door. His eyes flicked over the modest sedan, over my wet coat and slush-streaked shoes. The polite smile on his lips faltered for a split second before he caught himself. He still offered his hand, but I saw the hesitation. Inside the foyer, heat wrapped around us like a velvet curtain. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, catching the reflection of marble floors polished to a mirror shine. A massive Christmas tree stretched toward the ceiling, dripping in glass ornaments that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I caught my reflection in a gilt-edged mirror. My burgundy dress was spattered with stains, my hair damp and flattened mascara smudged faintly under my eyes. I looked less like a guest and more like someone who'd wandered in from the servants' entrance. My heart clenched. And then I heard her. Evelyn. Patricia Whitman. Ashley's mother descended the staircase in a gown the color of midnight. Every step was precise, rehearsed like she'd practiced in front of a mirror. Her gaze landed on Evelyn with warm surprise, then shifted to me. The warmth cooled instantly. And Mary, how unexpected. The way she said unexpected carried the weight of unwelcome. Mary was kind enough to help me with car trouble on the way here, Evelyn explained calmly. Quite resourcefully, I might add. Before I could process that, Ashley appeared from the parlor. Her gown shimmered in silver tones, her smile picture-perfect until she saw me. The smile froze. "Oh my goodness, Mary," she said, voice dripping with performative concern. "What happened to you?" I opened my mouth, but Dan appeared at my side before I could answer. He took in my disheveled state with a mixture of shock and worry. "Mom, are you hurt? You look like you've been through an accident." "I'm fine," I said quickly. "I just stopped to help someone on the road." Ashley's eyes darted to the stains on my dress. "Well, you should really freshen up before meeting everyone. There's a powder room down the hall. We wouldn't want you uncomfortable." Her words were sugar-coated, but the message underneath was clear: you're an embarrassment. The parlor quieted as Evelyn and I stepped in. Conversation stilled. Guests turned champagne glasses halfway to their lips. They took in the sight of me, hair-limp shoes, damp dress ruined, and I felt each stare like a pin pressed into my skin. This was exactly what I'd feared. A man near the fireplace whispered something to his wife. She hid a smile behind her flute. Another guest shifted eyes, sliding away politely but pointedly. My face burned. I longed for the floor to open beneath me. Ashley leaned toward Dan, her whisper a sharp hiss meant to be overheard. "This is embarrassing. Everyone's staring. Maybe she should go home, change, and come back later." Before Dan could answer, his father stepped forward. Edward Whitman carried the easy authority of inherited wealth. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that put you in your place. "Mary," he said smoothly, "so good of you to join us. Though perhaps you'd be more comfortable if you took a little time to get cleaned up. We'd all completely understand." The words cut deeper than Ashley's had. This was the patriarch speaking, the man whose approval my son craved, whose acceptance I'd been silently chasing. My cheeks burned hotter. For a moment I considered retreat, slipping back into the storm and letting the night close over me like a door that was never meant to open. But then Evelyn's voice cut through the room, calm, even, razor sharp. "Actually, Edward, I think everyone should hear about Mary's good deed before she changes clothes." The air shifted. Heads turned toward her, not me. Her tone was mild, almost casual, but beneath it was steel. After all, she continued, her blue eyes sweeping across the glittering crowd, kindness is rare these days. It deserves a spotlight. And just like that, the balance of the room began to tilt. The parlor seemed to shrink around me. Crystal light shimmered overhead, and yet all I felt was the weight of silence pressing on my shoulders. Dozens of faces, polished, powdered, perfectly dressed, stared at me as though I were an intruder. My son shifted beside me, his hand twitching like he wanted to speak, but fear held him back. Ashley folded her arms, lips pursed in a victorious line. Edward, her father, kept that practiced smile plastered across his face, certain I would slink away grateful even for the mercy of dismissal. And for a heartbeat I considered it. To apologize, excuse myself, step back into the storm. But then I thought about the woman on the roadside. Evelyn Whitman, though I hadn't known her name at the time. I thought about her silver hair wet with ice, about the way she'd trusted me to kneel in the slush and get my hands dirty when I could have simply driven past. And I realized walking away now would make all of that meaningless. So I took a breath. My voice shook at first, but the words came anyway. If I had to choose again, I said louder than I intended, between arriving spotless to this party or stopping to help a woman stranded in a storm, I'd still choose the woman. The words cut through the room like a crack in glass. Someone near the back coughed, covering a laugh. Another whispered, "She's serious." A few shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking between me and Evelyn. I straightened my shoulders, meeting their stares one by one. Maybe my dress is ruined. Maybe I don't look like I belong here. But I'd rather carry stains on my hem than a stain on my conscience. The heat rose in my cheeks, but this time it wasn't shame. It was something closer to defiance. Ashley let out a small, incredulous laugh. "That's very noble, Mary, but this is hardly the place for what I asked, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. For honesty. For remembering that we're people before we're decorations at a party." Her smile faltered just a flicker, but I caught it. Edward cleared his throat, stepping in. "I don't think anyone here doubts your good intentions. But presentation matters. Respectability matters. Surely you understand that." Respectability. The word landed like a stone. I remembered every time Patricia had introduced me not by name but as Dan's mother from New Haven. I remembered being seated at the far end of the wedding reception, as if proximity might tarnish the family photographs. Respectability had never included me. I could have stayed quiet. That would have been the safe choice. But for the first time in years, something inside me refused to shrink. "I understand more than you think," I said. "I understand that appearances are easy. Anyone can buy a dress style, their hair, rehearse a smile. But character, that costs something. Tonight it cost me my dignity in this room, and if that's the price, then I'll pay it gladly." The silence that followed wasn't the same as before. It wasn't dismissal. It was recognition in easy grudging, but recognition nonetheless. Dan's hand brushed mine, a silent squeeze. When I glanced at him, I saw something new flicker in his eyes. Pride. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. Across the room, Patricia's lips tightened. Ashley shifted uncomfortably, her silver gown rustling like dry leaves. Edward studied me with a narrowed gaze, calculating. And then Evelyn spoke. "Quite right," she said, her voice even but commanding. "Character costs something. It always has." The crowd's attention snapped to her like iron filings to a magnet. She stepped forward. Each movement measured her presence, filling the room effortlessly. "Mary didn't just arrive late," Evelyn continued, her eyes scanning the guests. "She sacrificed her appearance, her comfort, to make sure I wasn't left stranded in dangerous weather." A ripple moved through the room. Gasps, murmurs, the sudden realization dawning. Evelyn Whitman. The Evelyn Whitman. The woman they thought had arrived untouched by the storm. "She helped me," Evelyn said simply. With ingenuity, with courage, and without a moment's hesitation. That is what deserves our respect tonight, not the shine of a gown or the gleam of a chandelier. The air shifted. Where moments ago I had felt like a stain on their Persian rug, now eyes turned with something else. Curiosity, even admiration. Evelyn smiled faintly, then looked back at me. "Mary, would you tell them how you managed it? I think they could all stand to hear the details." I blinked, startled. "Well, it was nothing really. Just an old trick Tom taught me. Coca-Cola on the battery terminals." The murmurs rose again, some incredulous, some impressed. A man near the fireplace chuckled. "Practical. Haven't heard that one in years." And in that moment, standing in a ruined dress with my hands still faintly stained, I realized I wasn't invisible anymore. Not because I had fought for their acceptance, but because I had finally spoken with my own voice. Evelyn's voice carried across the parlor with a calm authority that silenced even the clinking of glasses. Practical knowledge, she repeated, her sharp blue eyes sweeping the room, applied without hesitation, without thought, for appearances. That's exactly the kind of spirit this family was built on. The crowd shifted, unease rippling through their perfectly pressed suits and gowns. I stood frozen, half wishing I could disappear, half stunned that she was defending me at all. Ashley's lips curved into a brittle smile. "Grandmother, perhaps we should let Mary get cleaned up before what Ashley Evelyn's tone was still pleasant, but it sliced through the air like a blade, before she embarrasses us, or before she reminds us that helping a stranger in need is far more admirable than polishing silver." A hush fell. Ashley's cheeks flushed, her eyes darting toward her father. Edward cleared his throat. "Mother, with all respect, this is a formal gathering. We can appreciate Mary's good deed, but surely there's a better time too." Evelyn lifted one elegant hand, and even Edward stopped. No, this is exactly the time. All of you." She gestured toward the circle of silent guests. "Dress yourselves in jewels and pride yourselves on lineage. Yet a simple act of kindness unsettles you. Why?" Her gaze swept the room, daring anyone to answer. No one did. "Because it reminds you," she continued, voice steady, "that wealth and titles mean nothing without integrity." I felt the warmth of her words like a shield wrapping around me. For years I had been invisible here. Tonight, for the first time, someone saw me and demanded the others see me too. Patricia's voice broke the silence, smooth and dismissive. "Evelyn, really? It's sweet that Mary helped you, but must we elevate a roadside repair into some grand parable? We have guests. We have tradition." Tradition? Evelyn cut in is only worth preserving if it honors the values it was founded on. Tell me, Patricia, when was the last time you sacrificed comfort to help someone? When was the last time you valued character over appearances? Patricia's mouth opened, then closed. Her silence was louder than any reply. Evelyn turned back to me. "Mary, my dear, you remind me of someone I once knew well, a young woman who was told she didn't belong, who was dismissed for her background, her lack of polish, who knelt in the dirt to build something that would outlast every chandelier in this house." Her words hung heavy, and I realized she was talking about herself. I blinked, unsure what to say. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," she corrected gently, "you did what few would have done, and that difference matters." The guests stirred, whispering now, not with scorn, but with curiosity. A woman in pearls leaned toward her husband. "Imagine stopping in that storm. I'd never." Another man murmured, "Resourceful, that's for sure." For the first time all night, I didn't feel like prey under their gaze. I felt seen. Evelyn placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. "You will stay just as you are, Mary, stains and all, because those stains tell a story far more impressive than any silk gown." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Thank you," I whispered. Her smile deepened, faint but fierce. "We're just getting started." The room began to buzz again, but the current had shifted. Where there had been whispers of mockery, now there were murmurs of interest. People approached tentatively at first, asking about the storm, the trick with the Coca-Cola, the courage to stop when others would have driven past. Each retelling of the story lightened the weight on my chest. Dan hovered nearby, his face still taut with worry, but I caught something new in his eyes. Respect. Ashley, meanwhile, stood rigid. Her smile fixed, but brittle, her grip on her glass so tight, her knuckles whitened. Patricia's gaze was icy, Edward's calculating, but none of them spoke against Evelyn again. Not tonight. Because in a single moment, she had flipped the script. And I, Mary Sullivan, the outsider, the embarrassment, the mother who never belonged, was no longer invisible. The dining room of the Whitman estate could have housed my entire apartment. A table long enough to seat 30 gleamed beneath 2 massive chandeliers. Silverware sparkled in perfect alignment. Crystal goblets shimmered like prisms, and porcelain plates bore the family crest in gold. Every detail screamed wealth, heritage, power. And then there was me. My dress stained, my shoes damp, my hair limp from the storm. I wanted to melt into the floor. But Evelyn had taken my arm, guiding me forward with the kind of quiet authority that no one dared question. "Mary will sit beside me," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Chairs scraped softly as people adjusted. Patricia's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Ashley's smile was frozen, her eyes darting toward her father for rescue. Edward cleared his throat, but remained silent. Whatever protest had risen in the room was smothered by Evelyn's command. I lowered myself into the chair between her and a distinguished man with a shock of white hair. He introduced himself as Ambassador Charles, retired after decades of service abroad. His wife, elegant and warm, leaned forward with genuine interest. "So, Mary," she said, "I hear you saved our dear Evelyn from being stranded in the storm." Heat crept into my cheeks. I wouldn't say saved. I just did what I could. Evelyn chuckled softly. "Don't be modest. She had me on the road in less than 10 minutes. Ingenious, really." The ambassador raised his brows. "How on earth did you manage that in this weather?" I hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Coca-Cola. It cleans corrosion off battery terminals. My late husband taught me that trick years ago." There was a ripple of surprise around the table. A younger man muttered, "I'd never have thought of that." A woman in pearls laughed lightly. "Resourceful. I'd have just called Chopaway and frozen while I waited." I relaxed a little. For the first time that night, people weren't looking at me with pity or disdain, but with curiosity, even admiration. Evelyn leaned closer. her voice pitched just enough to carry. "It's the simple wisdom that sustains us. Practical knowledge passed down, applied without hesitation. That's how we built what you see around this table." Her words landed like stones in still water. Conversations rippled, shifted. Some nodded thoughtfully. Others avoided her gaze. Across from me, Ashley forced a laugh. "Grandmother, you make it sound like changing a battery is a boardroom strategy." Evelyn's eyes sparkled. "Perhaps it should be." The ambassador chuckled. "Frankly, I find it refreshing. Most dinner conversations here are about market shares and mergers. Tonight we have something real." Ashley's cheeks pinked. Patricia dabbed her napkin against her lips, saying nothing, but her silence was heavy. Edward lifted his glass, studying me over the rim with a calculating gaze. I tried to focus on my plate on the delicate salad arranged like artwork, but Evelyn kept drawing me back into conversation. She asked about my years as a nurse, about the neighborhood kids Tom had taught woodworking to, about how we used to host Sunday suppers for anyone who needed a meal. She listened, not politely, not out of obligation, but with genuine interest. "Tom sounds like a remarkable man," she said softly. "Teaching skills, freely building community. That's legacy." My throat tightened. No one in this family had ever spoken of Tom before. Hearing his name honored here of all places sent a wave of gratitude through me. Meanwhile, I noticed Ashley shifting in her seat, her fork clinking against her plate. Every time Evelyn praised me, her smile grew tighter. Edward's jaw clenched with the same rhythm. And Patricia, her eyes flicked toward her husband, toward Ashley, then down to her plate. Calculating. Waiting. By dessert, the tension hummed beneath the silver cloches like a violin string pulled too tight. Evelyn raised her glass. "To Mary," she said, her voice carrying easily, "for reminding us that dignity isn't found in gowns or fortunes, but in the willingness to help when others would pass by." The toast echoed down the table. A few guests clapped lightly. Others murmured agreement. I sat frozen, overwhelmed, unsure how to respond. Dan touched my hand under the table, his voice low. "Mom, I've never seen grandmother like this." Neither had I. What I didn't know then was that dinner was only the beginning. The real conversation, the one that would shake this family to its core, was waiting behind the heavy oak doors of the library. After dinner, Evelyn rose from her chair with the kind of grace that commanded attention. "Shall we move to the library?" she said, as if it were the most natural suggestion in the world. The guests obeyed without hesitation. Chairs scraped back, conversations hushed, and soon we were filing into a room that felt like the heart of the estate. The library was magnificent, floor-to-ceiling shelves of leather-bound volumes, a fireplace big enough to stand in oil portraits of stern ancestors staring down from gilded frames. Plush leather chairs were arranged in small circles, as if even the furniture encouraged private counsel. I hovered near the doorway, unsure if I belonged here any more than I had at the dining table, but Evelyn caught my eye. With a small tilt of her head, she beckoned me closer until I was seated near her by the fire. The group that gathered was smaller now. Edward, Patricia, Ashley, Dan, a few family friends, and an older man Evelyn introduced as James Morrison, the family attorney. His sharp gaze suggested he already knew more about me than I would ever know about him. Edward cleared his throat, eager to retake control. "Mother, it's been a lovely evening, but perhaps the quarterly reports can wait until after Christmas." Evelyn smiled thinly. "I've already reviewed them." Patricia stiffened. Ashley glanced nervously at her father. Something unspoken passed between them, quick as lightning. "The company is strong," Edward said firmly. "Profits up, growth steady. The restructuring I implemented has been very successful." "Financially successful, yes," Evelyn replied. Her tone was calm, but the air in the room seemed to sharpen. "But we appear to have lost sight of something important to our founding values." Ashley's laugh was brittle. "Grandmother, surely you don't mean to burden this party with business talk." But Evelyn ignored her. She rose from her chair and crossed the room to a portrait above the mantel. It showed a woman in her 20s, hair pulled back, eyes bright with determination. The plaque beneath read, "Whitman Industries, 1969. "This is me," Evelyn said simply. The room went utterly still. I was 23 when I took out a $5,000 loan and opened a rented storefront in Hartford. Everyone told me I'd fail. A young mother. A woman, no less. But I built something anyway. Dan blinked, his mouth slightly open. You founded Whitman Industries." "Not your grandfather," I whispered before I could stop myself. Evelyn's smile was sharp. "Harold was a wonderful teacher and a good husband, but the business was mine. Every contract, every expansion, every risk it was my work. For decades, I let people assume otherwise because the world wasn't ready to accept a woman at the helm. Edward flushed his jaw tight. "Mother, you exaggerate. Father was supportive," Evelyn cut in. But he was not the founder. I was. And tonight, watching Mary remind me what integrity looks like, I realized it was time to reclaim that truth. The silence was deafening. Patricia's knuckles whitened against the armrest. Ashley's face drained of color. Dan looked stunned as though his entire understanding of the family had just shifted. I sat frozen, hardly daring to breathe. The storm outside rattled against the windows, but inside it was Evelyn who shook the room. Whitman Industries, she continued, was not built on cocktail parties and appearances. It was built on grit, on sacrifice, on the willingness to get your hands dirty when others looked away. Tonight, Mary reminded me of that. Her gaze landed on me, steady and deliberate. Heat rose in my chest, my ruined dress, my messy hair, my trembling hands, all the things I'd been ashamed of suddenly felt like a badge of honor. Mother Edward tried again, his voice taut. "This is hardly the time." "It is exactly the time," Evelyn said firmly. "Because if this family is to carry my name, it must also carry my values, and I will no longer sit silent while those values are eroded." No one moved. No one spoke. The portrait seemed to lean in closer, as if even the ancestors were waiting for her next words. And in that heavy silence, I understood this night wasn't just about a Christmas party. It was about legacy truth and a family that had forgotten who had built their empire in the first place. The fire snapped in the hearth, throwing shadows across the bookshelves. I sat stiff in my chair, every muscle tight. Evelyn's words still rang in the air. "I am Whitman Industries." Edward broke the silence first. "Mother," he said, his voice low but edged, "you can't just rewrite history over brandy in the library." Evelyn turned, her blue eyes glinting. "Rewrite. I'm not rewriting anything. I am correcting the story you've allowed to be told for decades." Patricia leaned forward, her hands clasped neatly in her lap. Her tone was smooth, almost soothing. "Evelyn, darling, no one denies you played a role. But Harold, your husband, was the face of the company. That's how people remember it. It gave us respectability." Respectability. Evelyn repeated the word sharp as glass. "You mean credibility in a world that couldn't accept a woman with ambition. I accepted the arrangement then because I had to. I do not accept it now." Ashley shifted uncomfortably. "Grandmother, you'll only confuse people dredging this up. Why stir old stories?" Evelyn's gaze snapped to her. "Because truth matters, and because values matter. Tell me, Ashley, what has our family contributed lately to the community that built our success?" Ashley faltered, glancing at her father. Edward stood straighter, reclaiming his usual command. "Our responsibility is to shareholders, to ensure profitability. Community relations are secondary." Evelyn's voice cut him off like a whip. "No, Edward. Community is never secondary. It is the foundation. Without people, without trust, without the goodwill of those around us, this company is nothing but numbers on a ledger." The tension in the room thickened, pressing on my chest. I wanted to sink into the leather chair and vanish, but then Evelyn's hand rested lightly on my arm, anchoring me. "Mary," she said, her voice gentler, "now you've spent your life serving people. As a nurse, as a mother, as a neighbor. Tell them what you told me on the roadside. Why did you stop?" My heart lurched. Dozens of eyes fixed on me, judging, calculating, waiting. My voice felt small, but it came. "Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. Clothes can be cleaned, parties happen every year, but leaving someone in danger, that would haunt me." A murmur swept through the group. Some guests nodded, slightly, others shifted in discomfort. Evelyn's gaze softened. "Exactly. That Edward is what I mean by values. Mary carries them still while too many of us have forgotten." Patricia's lips tightened. "With respect, Evelyn, are you suggesting this woman, she didn't bother to use my name, represents Whitman Industries better than your own family?" The sting of this woman burned hot in my chest. "Yes," Evelyn said without hesitation. "Tonight she does." The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Shock, indignation, disbelief. Edward's cheeks reddened. Patricia pressed a hand to her pearls, Ashley muttered under her breath. Through it all, Evelyn remained calm, regal, immovable. James Morrison, the attorney, cleared his throat. His eyes twinkled behind his glasses. "Mrs. Whitman has a point. Values and perception are as crucial as profit margins. Neglecting one undermines the other." Edward snapped, "This is family business, James." "With respect," James replied smoothly, That's exactly what makes it my concern. I sat there stunned, pulse racing. Minutes ago, I'd been an outsider dripping rainwater on their Persian rug. Now my presence was at the center of a storm shaking the family's foundations. Ashley's voice rose sharper now. "Grandmother, you're humiliating us in front of guests. In front of her." Evelyn's reply was like steel wrapped in silk. "No, Ashley. I am reminding you, and everyone here, that wealth without character is nothing but vanity dressed up for a party." Her words echoed against the shelves, final and unshakable. And as I looked around that grand library, I realized the storm outside wasn't the only one raging tonight. This family, this empire, they were standing on the edge of a reckoning. And somehow I was part of it. The library hummed with tension, the fire popping, as if it too knew something monumental was about to happen. Edward paced by the window, his jaw tight, while Patricia sat rigid in her chair, eyes sharp as cut glass. Ashley clutched her wineglass with both hands, her knuckles pale. Evelyn, meanwhile, seemed completely at ease. She stood near the mantel, one hand resting on the portrait of her younger self, the woman who had built Whitman Industries from nothing. Her voice, when it came, was steady and measured. "I've watched this company grow for more than 5 decades, she began. "I've also watched it change. Under Edward's leadership, profits have soared. But at what cost?" Edward turned his tone defensive. "Mother, we're stronger than ever. Expansion record earnings, surely that proves success." "Financially, yes," Evelyn said evenly. "But ethically, spiritually, we've lost our soul. Employees feel like numbers. Our charitable giving has dwindled to the bare minimum. Community partnerships, once our pride, have been cast aside. We are wealthy, yes, but we are no longer respected." Her words landed like stones dropped into still water. The ripple of discomfort passed across every face. Patricia forced a brittle smile. "Perhaps you're being dramatic. Businesses evolve, traditions shift. Values do not," Evelyn interrupted, her eyes flashing. The silence that followed was absolute. Then slowly she reached for a leather folder on the desk and opened it. Inside were neat stacks of documents, contracts, and handwritten notes. "I've been preparing for months," she said. "Reviewing our operations, consulting James here, considering what must change. And tonight, after what I witnessed, I know exactly how we will begin." I felt my chest tighten, though I didn't understand why. Evelyn's gaze found me steady and deliberate. "Mary will join Whitman Industries." The words struck me harder than the storm outside. "Me," I croaked. A dozen voices erupted at once, what Ashley's voice pitched high and credulous. "Absurd," Patricia snapped. Edward's tone thundered above them all. "Absolutely not." Evelyn lifted her hand and the room quieted instantly. Her authority was absolute. "Yes," she continued, her voice calm but unyielding. "Mary will serve as consultant for community engagement and values implementation. 6 months on trial. If successful, the role will become permanent. Salary $75,000 to start." My jaw nearly hit the floor. "Evelyn, I don't have corporate experience. I was a nurse, a mother, "You have exactly the experience we need," Evelyn said firmly. "You understand people. You solve problems without waiting to be asked. You carry integrity where others carry entitlement. Skills can be taught, Mary. Character cannot." The room bristled with disbelief. Ashley shook her head, muttering under her breath. Patricia leaned forward, her voice cold. "Evelyn, this is madness. To put the future of our family name in the hands of a woman who barely fits at our table." "Enough," Evelyn said sharply. "This family has been blind for too long. Tonight I saw more Whitman spirit and Mary stains on her dress, grease on her hands, than in all the polished shoes and pearls in this room." My heart pounded in my ears. I wanted to protest, to run, to hide. But at the same time, something in me stirred a spark I hadn't felt in years. Dan's voice broke through, hesitant but steady. "Mom, are you sure you want this? It's a big change." I looked at him, at the worry in his eyes, but also something else: respect. Pride. For the first time, he wasn't shielding me. He was standing beside me. My voice wavered, then found its footing. "Yes, I'll do it. At least the trial." Evelyn's smile bloomed fierce and triumphant. "Excellent. James, prepare the agreement." Edward's face flushed crimson. "Mother, you can't just hand out positions because someone fixed your car." Evelyn's gaze sliced through him like ice. "Watch me." The fire cracked behind her, punctuating the silence that followed. And as I sat there in that grand library, still in my ruined dress, I realized my life had just shifted on its axis. I hadn't just been defended, I had been chosen. And tomorrow I would begin a chapter I never imagined helping rebuild, not just a company, but the values that made it worth something in the first place. Monday morning, I stood in front of the glass tower that housed Whitman Industries. The building soared into the gray winter sky, sleek and intimidating, its mirrored windows reflecting a version of myself I barely recognized. Same coat, same worn shoes, but this time I wasn't just visiting. I was walking in as someone with a title, however fragile it might be. Inside the lobby gleamed with marble floors and modern art. Suits hurried past, heels clicked, phones buzzed. I clutched my new ID badge, the ink still smelling fresh, and tried to steady my breath. Consultant Community Engagement and Values Implementation. The words looked almost absurd beneath my name, Mary Sullivan. At the reception desk, the young woman glanced at my badge, then back at me, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Welcome, Ms. Sullivan. Conference room 12 8th floor. Mr. Whitman is expecting you." Mr. Whitman, of course, Edward. The elevator ride felt endless. My stomach knotted with each floor that ticked by. I knew what awaited me upstairs. Scrutiny, skepticism, maybe even open hostility. When I stepped into the conference room, my fears proved right. Edward sat at the head of the long table, immaculate in his tailored suit. Ashley perched 2 seats down, flipping through a leather planner. Patricia wasn't present, but her absence felt deliberate, as if she didn't want to witness what she expected would be my humiliation. Edward rose, his smile polite but thin. "Mary, welcome to Whitman Industries." Ashley's voice chimed in sweet as honey and twice as sharp. "We're so glad you could join us. This will be enlightening." I took my seat, clutching the notebook I'd bought at the drugstore for $2.99. Edward began. "As you know our grandmother, his emphasis lingered, has requested your involvement in our operations. We'll of course do our best to accommodate her wishes, but this is a business, not a charity. Results matter." I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "I understand." Ashley leaned forward, pen tapping against her notebook. "So tell us, Mary, what exactly qualifies you to advise a corporation of this size?" Her eyes sparkled with challenge, daring me to falter. I thought of Tom, of long nights in the hospital where I'd stayed by patients' bedsides, of neighbors whose kids I'd fed when groceries ran short, of fixing Evelyn's car in a storm without hesitation. "I don't have corporate experience," I said plainly. "But I do have people experience. 30 years as a nurse, a lifetime as a mother, and 1 long night as a neighbor who couldn't ignore someone in trouble. Those experiences teach you things you can't learn in boardrooms: listening, empathy, problem-solving under pressure. That's what I bring." The room was quiet for a beat. Ashley blinked, thrown off by my candor. Edward's expression tightened. "Admirable," he said smoothly. "But sentiment doesn't drive profits. What concrete changes would you suggest?" My pulse quickened, but I had come prepared. I flipped open my notebook pages filled with late-night scribbles. For starters, reinvesting in community programs, partnering with local schools and hospitals, hosting open forums where employees can voice concerns without fear, simple steps that build trust. When people feel valued, they work harder. Loyalty grows. That's profit too, just not measured in quarterly reports. Ashley smirked. "And you think you can measure goodwill on a balance sheet?" "No," I replied, meeting her gaze. "But you'll see it in retention rates, in fewer resignations, in employees who show up because they care, not because they have to. You'll see it when the community chooses Whitman products because they trust the name behind them." For the first time, Edward didn't have an immediate response. He drummed his fingers against the polished wood, his eyes narrowing. Finally, he said, "We'll give you 6 months. Grandmother insists. But make no mistake, if there are no measurable results, this experiment ends." "Fair enough," I said quietly. "If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me." Ashley closed her planner with a snap. "Good luck, Mary. You'll need it." But as I left the conference room, my steps felt steadier than when I'd arrived. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't just trying to belong. I was here to make a difference. The next morning, instead of taking the elevator straight to the executive floor, I asked the receptionist where the employee cafeteria was. She looked surprised, but pointed me down a hallway lined with framed photographs of past CEOs. Men in dark suits stared down from those frames, serious and distant. Not a single woman among them. The cafeteria was buzzing when I walked in. Plastic trays, clattering coffee machines, hissing the low hum of everyday conversation. Here the atmosphere was different from the polished marble of the upper floors. Workers in uniforms, clerks, assistants, custodians. People who kept the place running but rarely had a voice in shaping it. I got myself a black coffee and sat at an empty table. For a moment, I worried no one would join me. I was, after all, the outsider, the experiment. But soon a young man with tired eyes and a security badge on his belt hesitated nearby. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you Mrs. Sullivan, the new consultant?" I smiled and gestured to the seat across from me. "Mary, please, sit down." He introduced himself as Carlos, part of the night security team. His uniform was neat, but I noticed his hands trembled slightly as he stirred sugar into his coffee. "I've been here 8 years," he said. "We used to get regular check-ins from management, meetings where we could share issues. But lately," he shrugged, "feels like we're invisible. Last winter, one of our guys slipped on the ice outside. Took months to get new safety mats approved. We still don't have enough." I listened, jotting notes in my little notebook. Not polished proposals, just his words. His story. Soon, a woman in housekeeping joined us. Then another, an assistant from HR. Bit by bit, my table filled with people. They spoke cautiously at first, testing whether I really wanted to hear. But once they realized I wasn't brushing them off, the words poured out. Broken equipment never repaired. Promises of bonuses that never came. Charity drives canceled without explanation. A sense that the company cared more about appearances in glossy reports than the lives of those who kept the lights on. One woman, her apron smudged from the morning shift, said softly, "I've worked here 15 years. Used to feel proud telling people I was part of Whitman. Now," her voice trailed off, but her eyes said the rest. I felt a weight settle in my chest. These weren't complaints for the sake of complaining. These were cracks in the foundation proof of exactly what Evelyn had warned about. Before I left, I stood and looked around the table. "Thank you," I said simply, "for trusting me with this. I can't promise miracles, but I can promise you this. I'll carry your voices upstairs, loud enough they can't be ignored." Carlos gave me a half smile, weary but hopeful. No one said that in years. Back upstairs, I found myself in the elevator with Ashley. She eyed my notebook, stuffed now with pages of scribbles. "Making friends in the cafeteria?" she asked lightly, though her tone was laced with mockery. "Yes," I said, meeting her gaze, listening. She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Employees always have complaints. If you let them, they'll talk your ear off about broken coffee machines and parking spots. It doesn't mean anything." "It means everything," I replied, "because if they don't feel heard, they'll stop caring. And when people stop caring, that's when a company truly collapses." Her smile faltered just slightly, but she recovered quickly. "We'll see if grandmother agrees." Later that afternoon, Evelyn called me into her office. She sat behind a desk that looked more like a throne. Papers, neatly arranged glasses perched on her nose. "Well," she asked. I opened my notebook, the pages crammed with stories, and placed it in front of her. I spent the morning listening. "And this," I said, tapping the notes, "is where we begin." Evelyn leafed through the pages, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up, eyes bright with something I couldn't name, satisfaction, maybe even pride, maybe even... "Good," she said, "very good. Let them underestimate you, Mary. It makes the results all the more powerful." As I left her office, I realized something had shifted. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just surviving. I was building. By Thursday, my notebook was already half full. Pages of scribbled quotes, small details, weary faces. Each story weighed heavy in my chest, Carlos. And the missing safety mats, the housekeeper whose vacuum had been broken for months, the HR assistant who felt more like a shield than a resource. Evelyn decided it was time. "Present your findings at the next executive meeting," she said firmly. "Let them hear the truth from someone they cannot dismiss." So that morning, I found myself in the boardroom, seated at the long, polished table under the cold light of recessed chandeliers. Edward sat at the head, flanked by Patricia and Ashley. Around them were department heads in dark suits, faces polite but guarded. Evelyn took a seat at the far end, silent, her presence like a gavel waiting to drop. Edward opened briskly. "We'll review quarterly numbers first. Profits remain strong, projections steady. Expansion into Chicago is on track." When he finished, Evelyn spoke. "Before we discuss expansion, Mary has something to share." Dozens of eyes turned to me. My palms dampened, but I straightened my notes. "I've spent the past week talking to employees across departments I began. Not just managers, but security housekeeping assistants. People who don't often have a seat in this room." Ashley leaned back, arms crossed, smirk tugging at her lips. "Oh, this should be interesting." I ignored her. What I found was discouraging. Many feel unseen, Promises made then forgotten. Safety issues ignored for months. Morale low, loyalty eroding. A ripple of unease moved across the table. One executive frowned, another tapped his pen nervously. Edward's jaw tightened. Specifics. I opened my notebook. Carlos, 8 years in security, said it took months to replace one safety mat after a serious fall. Housekeeping has been requesting new equipment for over a year. Employees no longer feel proud to work here. They feel like ghosts. One man at the table shifted uncomfortably. "She's not wrong about the equipment," he muttered. Ashley pounced. "So we're taking complaints from janitors and security guards as gospel. Now, Mary, with all due respect, this is a corporation, not a charity. Employees will always complain." I closed the notebook softly, then looked her in the eye. There's a difference between complaining and crying out for respect. What I heard wasn't whining, it was exhaustion. People feel abandoned, and abandoned people stop caring. That's not just a moral issue, it's a business risk. The room went still. Evelyn's voice cut through the silence. "She's right." Edward bristled. "Mother." "She's right," Evelyn repeated, her tone sharp. "Profit is meaningless if it rots the core of the company. A tree can look tall and strong, but if the roots are dying, one storm will topple it." Patricia spoke finally, her voice smooth but edged. "Evelyn, perhaps Mary's intentions are good, but she lacks perspective. This company operates on scale. We can't chase every small grievance." I swallowed hard, then said quietly, "Small grievances add up to collapse. I've seen it in hospital. Signored voices leading to burnout mistakes. Tragedy. Here it may not cost lives, but it will cost loyalty. And once loyalty is gone, no expansion plan will save you." For a moment, no one spoke. Then the HR director, a woman with kind eyes, leaned forward. "She's not wrong. We've seen turnover increase 20% in the past 2 years. Exit interviews say the same thing. People don't feel valued." Edward shot her a warning glance, but Evelyn seized the opening. "There. Evidence from within." "Mary, continue." I lifted my chin. "We can start small. Regular listening sessions. Transparent timelines for repairs. Reinvesting in community programs. Show people they matter. If we do, pride will return. And with pride comes commitment." The boardroom was silent, but this time it wasn't dismissal. It was consideration. Edward finally spoke. His voice clipped. "Fine. We'll allow you 6 months. But if there's no measurable improvement, this experiment ends." I nodded. "Fair." Ashley muttered just loud enough to hear, "It'll end sooner than that." But Evelyn's eyes gleamed with something fierce. She looked at me, not them, and said softly, "You've planted the seed. Now let's see who's brave enough to water it." And for the first time in that cold boardroom, I believed I might actually belong there. A week later, I stood in a small conference room on the 3rd floor. No mahogany table, no chandeliers, just a circle of mismatched chairs, a pot of coffee, and a box of donuts I'd bought with my own money. A handwritten sign on the door read, "Listening session. Your voice matters." I half expected no one to show up. After years of being ignored, why would employees believe one outsider could change anything? But at 9 o'clock, the door cracked open. Carlos, the night security guard, slipped in, looking unsure. A moment later, 2 women from housekeeping arrived, whispering nervously. Then an IT technician, then a young woman from payroll. By 9:15, a dozen people filled the circle, clutching coffee cups, avoiding each other's eyes. I smiled, trying to hide my nerves. "Thank you for coming. This isn't about policies or paperwork. It's about listening. Tell me what's really happening here. Nothing leaves this room without your permission." Silence stretched. People shifted in their seats. Finally, the payroll clerk cleared her throat. "Honestly, it feels like we don't matter. Raises are promised, then delayed. We work late, no thanks. We're just cogs." A housekeeper nodded quickly. "My team's been asking for new equipment for over a year. Management keeps saying it's in the budget, but nothing happens. We make do with broken vacuums." Carlos leaned forward, his voice low. "It's safety for us. We're short-staffed at night. We patrol massive areas alone. I've asked for backup, but it's ignored. If something happened..." He let the sentence hang. One by one, the stories poured out. Not just complaints, but truths that had festered too long. Frustration, fear, exhaustion. I wrote furiously in my notebook, nodding, repeating back their words so they knew I'd heard. "You feel invisible. Promises without follow-through. Unsafe conditions. Lack of pride." A woman in IT looked up, eyes wide. "That's exactly it. Invisible, like we don't exist beyond our employee numbers." Her words struck me deep. Because hadn't I felt the same standing at the edge of Ashley's Christmas party, dismissed before I'd even opened my mouth? When the session ended, I thanked them. Your voices matter, and if I have anything to say about it, they will be heard upstairs. Carlos gave me a skeptical half smile. We've heard that before. I know, I admitted, but this time I'll carry your words myself, and I won't let them be buried. That afternoon, I typed up a simple report. No corporate jargon. Just direct quotes, bullet points, the raw truth of what I'd heard. Then I sent it not just to Evelyn, but to every department head. The reaction was immediate. By evening, whispers spread through the building. Did you see Mary's report? She actually quoted us. She named the safety issue in detail. For the first time in years, employees saw their words written plainly without spin. Of course, not everyone was pleased. Ashley stormed into my temporary office the next morning, her heels clicking like gunfire. She slapped a printed copy of my report on the desk. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've undermined management. You've made us look weak. I met her glare, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. I didn't make you look weak. Ignoring your people did. I just wrote it down. Her cheeks flushed crimson. Grandmother may tolerate this circus, but I won't. Keep poking holes in this company, and you'll find yourself out faster than you came in. She spun on her heel and left the door slamming behind her. I sat for a long moment, my hands trembling, but then I looked at the copy of my report on the desk. For the first time, employees had proof someone was listening. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start a fire even Ashley couldn't extinguish. I never imagined that one stormy December night could change the entire course of my life. Yet here I was, months after that Christmas party humiliation, standing at a podium in the Whitman atrium, speaking not only to executives, but to employees from every floor. Evelyn sat in the front row, her silver hair gleaming, her expression proud but calm. Behind me was a simple banner with 5 words, character over appearance always. I cleared my throat, nervous but steady. When I first walked into this building, I wasn't sure I belonged. Some of you probably wondered the same thing. After all, I didn't come from wealth. I wasn't raised in boardrooms. I was a nurse, a mother, a neighbor. But what I've learned, and what Evelyn reminded us, Alice, that belonging isn't about where you come from. It's about what you bring. I paused, glancing around the crowded hall. Custodians stood next to accountants, receptionists, next to department heads. For once, there was no hierarchy, only faces waiting to be heard. What I've seen in these past months, I continued, is that people here care deeply. You've endured long nights, broken promises, and moments where you felt invisible. But still you showed up. Still you kept this company running. That isn't weakness, that's resilience. A ripple of agreement passed through the room. Someone clapped quietly. I let my eyes rest on Evelyn. She gave me a small nod, encouraging me forward. And yes, I said softly, I've also seen the pain that comes when families turn on each other. Some of you know what that feels like. I do too. There were moments I thought I'd lost my son to a world that judged me unworthy. There were moments when I was dismissed, belittled, treated as if my presence was an inconvenience. Those wounds cut deep. They are part of family betrayal stories that so many of us carry quietly in our hearts. My voice wavered, but I steadied it. But betrayal doesn't have to be the end. It can be the beginning of something new if we choose forgiveness. Not the kind that ignores hurt, but the kind that says, I will not let bitterness write the rest of my life. The room was utterly still. I saw Dan standing at the edge, his face taut with emotion. Ashley was there too, her arms folded, but even she looked unsettled, her mask of certainty cracked. I took a deep breath. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it releases its grip. And once we let go, we create space for growth, for connection, for building something better. Evelyn forgave the world for dismissing her as a woman in business. I forgave my son for letting silence stand where love should have been. And today I stand here, not as a victim, but as someone reborn. Evelyn slowly rose from her seat and began to clap. The sound echoed in the vast atrium. One by one, others joined, hesitant at first, then louder, until the whole hall thundered with applause. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. Tears pricked at my eyes. When the noise settled, I stepped down from the podium and walked to where Dan stood. His voice was low, breaking. Mom, I'm sorry for every time I didn't speak up, for every time I let you stand alone. I touched his cheek gently. I know, son. And I forgive you. What matters is what we choose from here. Ashley hovered behind him, her face pale. For a moment she looked like she might leave, but then she spoke almost in a whisper. "I misjudged you. I thought respect came from perfection. I see now it comes from something else. I don't expect forgiveness right away, but I want to try." I studied her face, the pride, the fear, the tiny crack where truth had finally seeped in, and though my heart still carried scars, I nodded. Trying is a good place to start. The moment felt fragile but real, like a seed pushing through cold ground. Later that evening, Evelyn and I sat together in her study. The fire glowed, casting warm light over the shelves. She handed me a glass of tea, her voice thoughtful. "You've given this family something money could never buy, Mary. You reminded us who we are." I smiled faintly. "You did that. I just carried the torch you lit long ago." She shook her head. "No, my dear. You lit it again when it was almost gone." We sat in silence, the kind that feels like peace. Outside, the storm had long passed, leaving the night sky clear and filled with stars. As I prepared to leave, I looked back at her. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did." Evelyn's smile was soft, but her words were steel. "Never forget, Mary, true wealth is measured not in fortunes, but in the lives we touch. And that dear friends is how a woman once humiliated at a Christmas party found her purpose in the very place she was told she didn't belong. It wasn't just about corporate titles or polished appearances. It was about dignity, forgiveness, and the quiet strength of choosing love over bitterness. If you've ever carried wounds from family betrayal stories, know this. Your worth is not defined by how others see you. Forgiveness doesn't make you weak, it makes you free. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If this story touched you, please subscribe, share it with someone who needs hope, and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Because your voice matters. Always.